Welcome back. So journalists are frontline workers and have been risking their lives by being in the thick of things, bringing you updates on what's happening across the country during these devastating times. Well, there's some good news. Government has informed the South African National Editors Forum that journalists and media workers will be included in the current vaccine rollout program and will receive their jabs soon. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Ngalwa, who is with Sanef. Sbu, thank you so much for making time. You petitioned the National Coronavirus Command Council, I think in January this year, making the case for journalists. What have they informed you of?
Well, as you said, Clement, yes, we did write to them in January when they were announcing the different phases of the rollout. And at the time, they had mentioned the second phase that was to come, and they had mentioned the categories, or rather the professions that would be considered as part of that, and they had omitted journalists. And once again, we had to remind them, as we had done last year, that journalists to consider ourselves as frontline workers, given the fact that we are out there telling the unfolding story of South Africa's COVID-19 response and being at risk of infection. So what we did was to actually make sure that we would be considered in the second phase. And yes, we did receive word from the Department of Health that we would be considered as part of the second wave. But then what had happened, rather the second phase, rather. But what happened, Clement, was that there was a lot of confusion over the past few weeks, as you would know as a newsroom as well, that government's COVID-19, the vaccine rollout has not been smooth. So the frustration has been there for many sectors, and it was there for us as the media as well. So last week we sent another letter to the Department of Health's Director General, just to get a sense as to where do we fall in the queue, given the fact that there are different subcategories. And yesterday there was a National Coronavirus Command Council where they confirmed that indeed they will be considering journalists in the coming few weeks, I would say 2 weeks, Clement, because what has happened is that they have now, the GCIS through Sanef has asked that media houses, there are forms that we've distributed to various media houses and also to the Association of Independent Producers, so that all these companies and all these small players can be able to submit the names, not just of journalists, but also of all media workers and their organizations, so that they can, the whole the media industry can be vaccinated in the coming 2 weeks, I would say, Clement. But obviously, as you know, that I think there's still going to be the police and then the media after that.
Yeah, and we don't even have enough vaccines, so I don't even know if it will be in the coming 2 weeks or the coming 6 months. But at least they've indicated and confirmed that we'll be part of the next phase. Just to clarify, it's not just journalists, right? It's media workers. How broad is that? And do we have to register on the system, or are we going to now fill the forms that you as Sanef have sent to the various newsrooms, and then they will take it from there?
Now, Clement, originally what we had asked for, because we do not want to be seen to be demanding, given the need, the dire need for vaccines, we had asked that journalists, those who are out there in the cold face of storytelling, that they be considered. But I think that the government, in their wisdom, they realize that actually it makes sense to cover the media industry, including your, I would call sub-editors who are in the newsroom. Because, I mean, if you are to argue, if you are to come up with subcategories within the media, then it would become confusing in that if a journalist is out there, who exactly would you consider, for instance, a sound engineer as a frontline worker? Yes, if there's an outside broadcast. So they just decided to cover everyone. That is why now, in fact, the sooner media companies submit those details, the sooner we can be vaccinated, Clement, because they now await, they want a database, and then from there they will be able to communicate with those individuals to say, those of us who are in an urban center like Johannesburg can present ourselves to this particular, maybe to a number, in fact to a number or a central vaccination center. And now you would imagine that there are colleagues who find themselves in far-flung areas who are working as independent publishers or journalists or freelancers. Now those ones, what they would do is that they would have to present themselves to the nearest vaccination center in their locality, Clement.
Yeah. Just lastly, Sbu, to some media houses that may possibly be, small, community-based, what do they need to do if they haven't received communication from Sanef and they've got journalists that are also out in the field reporting about this pandemic? How should they get in touch with Sanef? How do they get in touch?
They can get in touch with Sanef, but Clement, it must be made clear that the Sanef is not the sum total of the media industry in South Africa, and also because we realize that what we have done is to communicate with the other associations. For instance, there is SAFRIA, which is South African Freelancers Association. We've distributed the forms to them to send to their members. And also there's AIP, which is the Association of Independent Publishers. Now, AIP as well have their own database of of the very category of journalists that you're talking about. So they will distribute these forms far and wide to their members to make sure that there is no one who is left out, who is deserving of a vaccine under this particular phase. And what would be required of us as journalists would be to produce a media card, which is your press card, and a letter from your editor. And I guess the same holds if you are a freelancer. If you're a freelancer and you actually write for a particular newspaper, then the editor of that newspaper should not have a problem to put a letter on their letterhead and sign it to indicate that you do write for them. So that should suffice to as some kind of identification to make sure that those journalists are covered during this difficult period. Because the reality is that, Clement, with this Delta variant, we journalists are not holding back. They are not working from home. They are out there in the streets. So it is important that we do get the necessary cover so that we can continue the important work that we do, Clement.
All right. Sbu Ngalwa, thank you so much for your time. He is a member of the South African National Editors Forum.